Hey gang! Well, going by the poll, it looks like PS1 is in the lead. So here we are, the 7 PlayStation 1 games that changed my life. Let me just be clear, it's RPG heavy, it's mostly Square, it's probably things you would expect, and that's just how it is. I played other games, to be sure, but the PlayStation 1 generation for me was almost 95% RPGs. But let's get right into it and get this one out of the way. I thought about bundling these together. Final Fantasy VII changed my world because it showed the evolution of game graphics as far as RPGs were going for me. Because that's what I gravitated towards. And that's, I thought about bundling 7, 8, and 9 together because, honestly, they're just steps of the evolution that we saw when you go forward in time and you look at how far we've come with RPGs and everything else. Like, the evolution from 7 to 8 in terms of graphic and hands, and then 8 to 9, while 9 was not graphically as realistic, it was still much smoother. And that was, the scale of power for the PlayStation 1 in it through its life cycle. And, devs just getting better tools to make better games. But Final Fantasy VII, arguably one of the best in the franchise, although there are people who love it and there are people who hate it. I adore Final Fantasy VII for a variety of reasons. 8, not as much. 9, I adored. 8, I found a little too on rails. But that's neither here nor there. In total, Final Fantasy, that's where I have to start because that's the first game I picked up when I got a PlayStation. That's what I wanted. So, could you expect anything else? And we're going to get after the next one because you should know what it's going to be. And of course, it's tactics. Tactical RPG at its best. Even with the duplication bug, the story, the units, getting the classes, the various characters, which, getting reacquainted and hearing the music again in Final Fantasy XIV has been a delight. Rumors are abounding about a remake, which I hope, if Tactics Ogre has taken off and Geofield has done well, then come on, it's time for us to get back to Final Fantasy Tactics. Not that weird sequel on the Game Boy Advance, but Tactics itself. Give me Final Fantasy Tactics. I want to play that story again. I want to be in that world again. In just that game goodness with an orchestrated version of the soundtrack. Yes, please. Yes, please. So, here we go. Number 3. You might guess it. Legend of Dragoon. Oddly enough. Such a first party RPG from Sony that sadly never got a sequel. And for some is largely forgotten. I've seen friends like Wrecked Wizard who tried to play it and just couldn't get into it. Other people adore it. People hate it. I adored Legend of Dragoon. The music, the story was interesting, the variety of combat, and just it was trying to compete, sort of. It was chasing that Final Fantasy money, and it kind of did, and it kind of didn't. But it holds a place in my heart, as with all these RPGs, and you can see that on my channel now with all the games I play. Should be obvious. Moving right along with another game that's getting a remake. Star Ocean 2. I adored Star Ocean 2. I put stupid amounts of time into Star Ocean 2. Stealing things from people and the printing, making the money and running around and the characters and the story. I have played later versions of Star Ocean. Till the End of Time is a good one. But there is something about Star Ocean 2, probably why it's now getting the remake, which I have mixed feelings about the art for that, I'll be honest. Because the pixely characters on those beautiful backgrounds is weird to me, but maybe it's just, I'll get used to it. I'm just looking forward to playing that game again and seeing what they do with a remake. Considering the remakes that we have gotten of some of these games that are on this list, or are coming, I have hopes, and Square has been doing a better job. Well, Square Enix now, because this is an Enix title, or at least it was at the time, they've been, you know, the remakes have gotten better. And we'll get into that in a minute. So, or the Pixel remasters have been really good too. And Chrono Cross's remaster is supposedly really well done. I've only played a little bit of it. I plan on streaming that. But, you know, Star Ocean 2 remake, I'm here for it. And that brings me to the next one, which is actually not a Square or Enix title. Because I have a couple of, there's a couple in here. Not that many, but a couple. And that would be Sekiden 2, which 108 Stars of Destiny. Running around with you know, smacking things. And the whole world of Sekiden. And I fell in love with that franchise. I adore 4 and 5. Don't at me, it's true. I really enjoyed them. And I really wish Konami would actually make a new one. You know, it's time. They're remastering 1 and 2. I look forward to playing 2 again. I played 1, I enjoyed 1, but 2 is probably my favorite out of the franchise. I think it goes 2, 4, and then 5 for me. I didn't get a chance to play 3 yet, and that's something I should rectify. But, you know, what can I say about Sekiden 2? All those characters you were trying to get, and the war, and everything about it was just fascinating. And it was an interesting world that they kept expanding. And hope someday, maybe before I die, we'll get a Sekiden 6. I mean, we got Sekiden Tactics, which doesn't count, but still, it's a thing. I've got the disc somewhere. Like, all of these games, you could just see it stacking up to being RPGs everywhere. And I would be remiss without talking about Saga Frontier, which is a weird one from Square, but it was so good. The remaster is excellent, which I need to play more of. I adored Blue, the story with Robo's story, and then just the demon world, and the superhero guy whose name escapes me at the moment, and now with the remake where you can play Fuse's storyline, which I still have to do, like, and then you've got Jen and Luca, and like, it was just an offbeat game that got progressively harder with the more enemies you fought, and it was fascinating. And I loved Blue. I think Blue is my favorite character, honestly, mostly just because of the convenience of him being able to teleport to places he's already been, and, you know, and always going back to scrap and doing all the things. Like, there was just so much to all of these games, and they just proved just how absorbing video games could be, especially RPGs. Which brings me to number 7 on the list, which you probably know what it's gonna be. Maybe you don't. I could have put Romance of the Three Kingdoms Wall of Fire on here because I played it on the PlayStation as well, and it did run better on the PlayStation, I'll be fair. But I'm gonna end it the way I probably should, and that's with Legend of Mana, which was not the longest or best of the Mana series, but it's one of my personal favorites. Just, you know, laying out the tiles. The remaster is really good, actually, and I need to play more of that again. And just those characters, and the unique, interesting world, and planning out where you're going to drop different maps so that you could unlock different demi-humans. That was always interesting. And just the progression of the stories and the jewels. The anime that came out last year, or this year? Was it last year? I think it was last year. It was beautiful. An excellent retelling of the story. I really enjoyed it. And, like, I was a Square Enix kid for most of the PlayStation era. I mean, there are games I could talk about. I actually enjoyed Gran Turismo, especially Gran Turismo 2. I loved Omega Boost. There's, you know, lots of other games, Arc the Lad, that I could have put on the list, but if I'm being honest about games that fundamentally formed the gamer that I am, it would be these 7 RPGs. Like, there were all kinds of games I played on PC as well, because I was PC gamer alongside with the PlayStation era and the subsequent consoles that followed. And that list is probably going to be more varied. I almost put MechWarrior 2 on here, but let's be honest, MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries on PC was the experience of that time. But I digress. This is about PlayStation. PlayStation became a big part of my life between PS1 and PS2. More so PS2, just everything builds on itself, really. From NES to Super Nintendo, the PlayStation, the PS2. That's the direction I put. Yes, I did some N64 in there, and I fiddled with a bit of GameCube and stuff. But for me, it was NES. Well, it was Atari 2600 and Apple II. Because I'm old. To NES, to Super Nintendo, and a little bit of Sega, to PlayStation 2. And then in an abrupt turn, it became Xbox 360. But we'll get there in another video. What can I say? All of these games, the majority of which are Squaresoft games, they formed who I am. And a lot of these things that you see, especially in the RPGs, eventually became a big part of MMOs. And a lot of the common currency and like the nomenclature we use for MMOs, talking about potions and, you know, revives and the skills, a lot, and all the magic and stuff that you see in MMOs today, a lot of that came up out of games like Final Fantasy or Ultima, you know, and action RPGs. You go from Zelda to Secret of Mana, and you get the Legend of Mana, and so many more now today, many of which I'm playing now. Look at Trinity Trigger. You can catch playthroughs of that on the channel. That's a very good spiritual successor of the Secret of Mana series. Absolutely. And there's more things coming. I almost put Harvest Moon Back to Nature on this list, but I covered Harvest Moon in SNES and SNES, really? SNES, the Super Nintendo. And I could put Harvest Moon back on the list maybe when I get to the Wii. Although, then I could be talking about Rune Factory. But I'm off on a tangent. You came here for the PlayStation games. This is my list. I kept it pretty short and sweet because what more can I say about all of these games? Final Fantasy VII was just fantastic for what it was. Sure, there are things that, you know, didn't quite make sense. And there are bits in it that still bug people. The whole marching thing kind of irritates me a little bit. The pressing the buttons and going over to do it again and again to try to get better rewards, and, you know, getting Knights of the Round because you had to be that kind of completionist. Or, you know, Legend of Dragoon and the switching, all of them switching discs, you know. Star Ocean, just that whole story of Claude, second and two, and trying to get all the characters you possibly could. Saga Frontier getting harder as of time, and certain characters, their storylines being even more difficult, and eventually you give in and get the Game Genie out and plug that in so that you have, you know. And of course, Legend of Mana just left you hungry for more that you never quite got. And of course, Final Fantasy Tactics, you just wanted to keep playing it, and you wanted more. And you had to wait for Game Boy, and the Game Boy was disappointing, and then we're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. So Square, please, Square Enix, it's time. Give us our Final Fantasy Tactics remake. Please? Please? Thank you. Okay, that's it. That's it for this one. Thanks, everybody, for watching this far. Do the things like subscribe, whatever. I'm not your dad, but I sure love having you to hang around. What are your top 7? What are your 7 PlayStation games that you love? Put them in the comments. Let's talk about these things. Okay, bye-bye.